just quickly, for those who don't know me, my name is Barry Cranford. I'm the founder of the London Heads of People community, and I run a business called RecWorks, which is a tech recruitment company. We do a bunch of stuff around running communities and mentoring and a load of other things. I'll put some notes in there in the chat, but today is all about Will and Marie. So I'm joined with Evie to interview Will and Marie. Marie, would you mind just maybe saying a few words about your background and what brings you here and what you're hoping to cover today?
Sure. Hi. Hi, everyone. So my name is Marie, and I was working at a fantastic learning and development company called Learnably until last week, and I'm going to start a new position in a cryptocurrency at a cryptocurrency platform at the start of May. They're called MoonPay. I'm going to be a people lead there. And I also co-founded a people operations community where like people can, I was a standalone people ops person. I got the job title with no idea what I was going to have to face. And I thought I'm going to leverage the knowledge of people who actually have some of that experience. Because as standalones, we tend to work on similar projects, but not necessarily on the same timelines. And that's how I learned about people ops in the first place, just getting my hands really dirty. And so I look forward to sharing more about that.
Sure. Thanks, Marie. Will, can you share a little bit about your background into this?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Will. I'm head of people at My Tutor, which is an online tutoring marketplace. And my background, I've only ever worked at My Tutor before, joined sort of founding team, and sort of worked my way up through to a senior level, but not actually in people operations or HR at all. It was actually sort of customer facing operations. And then it was really with kind of lockdown, COVID, switch to remote working, my responsibilities sort of really shifted and someone needed to take a lot of ownership over this area, and it kind of came across to me. So a relatively steep learning curve when it comes to people. Luckily, People Stories has been there to get me through it. But yeah, very excited to be here.
Fantastic. And this People Stories, I'll probably say it again a number of times, but if you're not on it, then you definitely should be, or should apply to be. So that's really how we've all come together, as Marie mentioned, that she co-founded it, but it's how I've come to know Will, and there is just so much kind of support and so many questions and stuff flying around all over the place. The most active Slack group that I've seen, especially bearing in mind it's not like thousands of people. So yeah, speak to Marie afterwards and get involved. Evie, finally, as my co-interviewer, did you want to say a few words just to bring your story forward and why you're here?
A good question. Why am I here? I've been lucky enough to know and work with Barry for coming up for 5 years now, initially as a technical recruiter. And since leaving recruitment, I've been doing a few different bits, primarily in the last year, in a very unexpected year, obviously, as everyone had. I've been working in a care home. And really with the experience of recruitment, which is obviously all about building relationships, and working in care, where there's a complete dearth of employee well-being and actually communication there, it's just made me very aware of how much I would like to contribute my skill set, seeing how communication works well and actually how corrosive it can be when it doesn't work well. Into people operations, which my understanding is that it's a growing, highly competitive, but nonetheless bubbling department.
Great, thanks, Evie. So, okay, we're here to talk about people ops and its relationship with HR and that kind of thing. So we've had submitted questions. You're all invited to submit questions when you signed up. And I'm going to start with one of those because I think it perfectly explains what we're here to find out. So somebody said, having come from more of a traditional HR background, I'm keen to understand the difference people think there is between HR and people ops, because I'm now in a people ops role. So Marie, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay. What exactly is people ops? But so that we can bring everyone up to the same level.
Ask me the easy question first. No problem. So I would say there is an overlap of focus like the responsibilities, the things that you're responsible for, overlap. Their employee experience, like performance, compensation, onboarding, and all of that type of employee journey type of stuff. And I found this definition actually in an article called "It's Not HR, Enter People Operations." Let me just find the name of the author, Andy Chan. And I really like how he defined it. So like loosely copied, it would be like people operations is not a subset of human resources. It's rather an all-encompassing department that also accounts for human resource responsibilities, and it has a broader approach that would include stuff that traditionally HR has not necessarily like looked at, like how can we make it a mutually beneficial dynamic between employees and companies, hence the like then having a product mindset in your approaches. I think that also defines people operations. How can we, as HR or people operations, as well as doing the HR stuff, compliance, legals, and all of that type of thing, make sure that everyone gets what they need and what they want every step of their employee journey, the same way a product would add value to a person that uses it regularly.
Great. Well, would you add anything to that, or contrast, compare?
Yeah, sure. I stumbled across quite a funny quote in a blog by John Birdsong that was, what's the difference between people ops and HR? And the answer is branding. So like, yeah, like Marie said, there is quite a lot of overlap there. I think startups and scale ups have a fantastic way of taking quite traditional sounding things and making them sound cool. So I guess like customer success is another example of a kind of a new word that's kind of come over in the past few years. But yeah, I think there are some differences there. Sometimes I feel HR gets a slightly bad rap. Even from me, when I first kind of, before I even became people, I was sort of like, oh, HR, I'm not sure about that. Don't know. But the more you kind of find out about it, but it seems often it's sort of a bit more bureaucratic, working within existing structures, like Marie said, like compliance, payroll. And for me, what I think about with people ops is often like innovation. And I think maybe that's, again, these sort of startup scale up companies that sort of coined the phrase. There's much more need for innovation in the space because they didn't have the processes. They were starting from scratch. They were working in sectors that weren't well established. So there was a much more need to innovate and be creative. I think that's something I've sort of seen.
And how, Will, just to ask on that, as you said that the smaller, maybe slightly cooler startups, that they've managed to coin it as brand and about innovation. Do you, or a question to both of you, do you know how you might be able to protect that brand in a company that was past the startup stage and had more members and still was able to keep the innovative quality versus falling back on processes that are already in place?
Before answering the question on brand, sorry about that, I'm going to circle back because I want to say that I disagree that it's just branding. I think there is a difference in how we approach the work, even if there's an overlap of focus. And I'll give a very a tangible example. If you think about learning and development, for example, I mean, I come from like Learnably, so L&D example is what you get. There's training and there's bottom-up development, what people want, their personal development plan. And there's mandatory training like GDPR stuff that you really can't escape. So traditionally, an HR function would have looked at what learning management system can I implement in my company to automate tracking who has done what type of training. And then traditionally again, and that's like the HR rep also where it stems from, it would be content would be top down being someone speaks, they share information like Will and I are doing now, and it's less collaborative, and maybe we like give you exercises or just traditional training, like school type of stuff. And then a learning management system allows you to track that. And that's HR in terms of perspective, because the focus is compliance. And then you have a bottom-up approach, which I think is more linked to a people operations, like product approach, which is how do we design learning and development so that people want to engage with it? They need to have clarity over the value that it brings. They need to have clarity over what they want to achieve in the first place, not what they need to be compliant on. And so that would be like the Learnably product proposition, where people like can go and spend their learning budgets however is fit to their growth. Now, it's not one or the other. That's why I like the definition of people operations is an all-encompassing people experience department that accounts for human resources as well. Because if you're in learning and development, but with a people ops approach, you're still going to need to keep track of GDPR training. You're still going to have an aspect of compliance. But ultimately, you're always going to try and design your work so that people want to be there, like a subscription model.
It's really interesting. So the way you're describing it, you'd see like people ops. You don't have either or, but you have HR and something else over the top of that, and that almost encompasses what people ops is. Have I understood that correctly? Yeah.
It's transcending, but it's not getting rid of. Like, we still want to do stuff legally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So would you have within your people ops team an HR person, or is this like a shift in mindset that everybody underneath your within that people ops team, everyone, they might have like more of a compliance person that has this same people ops mindset on top of what they have to do?
I think, well, for me, the way I think it depends a lot about how you want to structure your team. So something we're trying to do at my tutor is bring in specialists into the team. So you might have an L&D specialist. You might have someone who's more focused on the compliance side, the policy side of things. You might have someone who's really geared towards like the marketing, so employer brand. So building the specialists in the team and then having them partner across. So they might work collaboratively on projects together. So if there's say there's a new compliance law that needs to be put in place before someone can join a company, or something to do with Brexit, there might be a project that needs to be kicked off, that the policies need to be changed, the process needs to be updated, and the onboarding specialist might be the person who focuses on the onboarding part of the journey for the employees, or so there might be different parts to play, and then you kind of have your partnering across the business. How do you make sure that's implemented across? So I think it probably depends how you want to structure it, but I think the way I see it, I would probably look to have someone who's got that specialism in those more kind of compliance-based areas as I build a team out.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I think it's as Will said, like, so long as the person, whether they do compliance or engagement, so long as what's at the forefront of their thinking is, what do my employees need? What do they want? And how can we like do what needs to be done whilst adding value and making sure that everyone knows what they get out of it, even if it's compliance related. That's not a problem.
Okay,
and how sorry, Barry.
Sorry.
And how, and I suppose this is circling back to the ultimate question of what's the difference between people ops and HR. So if the mantra of people ops is what do the people need, so I'd ask this purely for my own education, what would you say is the defining purpose of HR?
I guess I have to go first because I'm well, just I don't think I'm best placed to answer that question to start with, because I've never worked in a purely HR position. But it would be from what I gather, making sure that people are working as, effectively as possible in a compliant way that's beneficial for the business, and where they also, want to stay. I mean, there's definitely the overlap here, but in terms of like, how do you approach these problematics? You can always approach it from a compliance perspective, but if you do it without, for example, like surveying all of your employees first, then that would be more top down. And I would probably assimilate HR in terms of processes more to an LMS, learning management system, like compliance related.
So far more process led.
No, because both need to be process led. If the definition of a process is defined repeatable steps that achieve a predictable result, then you need that for every department. It's more like how much do you take the value add for the employee into consideration? For example, applied to recruitment, it would be, how do you ensure that everyone you reject has a fantastic experience where they get value out of the process, even being rejected, so that they become loyal to your company and they share with the friends, families, and apply again the next time they're looking for a job? How do you add value? How do you make how do you make it clear what this value add is? And that comes with also having that product mindset where you embed short feedback loops. Like I don't know a better way to add value to candidates than to have a feedback point in your rejection messages where you ask them, by the way, like, what do you wish was in that message that isn't there, that would add value to your life as someone who was just rejected from the process?
Hone in on that as a specific example. That is something that is a great example of having this people ops mindset, this way of doing things. Have you learned anything from anything like that specific question, or improvement within the recruitment processes, that you're like, that's why we do that, that's why people ops is important? Anything that can really kind of drive that home?
Go on, Maria.
Do you mean, I'm not sure I understand the question. Do you mean like gotten some feedback that's insightful enough that we actually use it to iterate on the process?
Precisely, yeah. That you've
1,000%. That's 100% of the work I have ever done is purely that. I have no answers to anything. All I do is ask people what they want, and then I put it in place, and then they're happy about it.
Yeah,
that was nice. Can you share any examples of things, anything that jumps out around that kind of thing, whether it be the recruitment process or something else?
Yeah, I think, Will, do you want
to? So just where we've collected feedback and then use that.
And then made these changes off the back of that.
Oh, just constantly. I mean, we're currently doing our EDI survey at the moment at my tutor, and that's one to collect, the demographic data about the team, so as sort of a benchmark, but also there's like areas to feedback, so that helps, how we decide our D&I strategy moving forward, what initiatives we want to run, what we're not focusing on enough, what we can do better. And, the same goes for ENPS surveys, employee net promoter score. A huge amount of what we do is just is based off quick feedback, really. So it really helps form a part of the strategy. We use the results from that to help set our strategies, really, combined with kind of business needs, etc. So it's massively important. Progression frameworks, for example, working on progression at my tutor, that's become because people, as we've grown, people have become a little bit more uncertain around what progression means. They're looking for a bit more structure and support. So we're building that based off the back of the feedback.
And how this, as I'm about to ask this, I'm wondering if this is a silly question, but I've started now. As you said, the whole role is asking and asking and asking. How regularly do you implement those feedback loops, and are there any particularly successful ones that you found have been a great way of collecting honest feedback?
Me or Murray?
Oh, either. So so just to simplify it. So how regularly do you have those feedback loops, and what have you found is the best way to get honest feedback?
So I think with getting feedback, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to have the trust. You've got to have a culture of feedback, and I guess it's a bit like chicken or egg. But you need to have senior leaders showing vulnerability to the team. You have to show examples of feedback that is given having a positive outcome, and showcasing that, and that's how you can kind of culturally get it out there. Whenever feedback's given, it should be 360, and it should be two ways. And that's, I guess that's more like culturally how you do it. I guess practically, we're just moving to a company called Lattice. I'm sure most people have heard them, which has some great tooling for kind of regular feedback collecting. You can finish a project, you can ask for some, you can get it pretty regularly, and that can be either more public, one-to-one. And for us, I'd expect each quarter, if your objectives are set quarterly, you should be receiving feedback on how you perform against those. But the best feedback is always given pretty much as close to the incident or when it needs to be told as possible, I guess.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the shorter your feedback loop, the less scary it's going to be for you, as regardless of whether you're HR, people ops, or just any department really. The shorter the feedback loop, the least scary the implementation or the iteration you're going to do, because it's going to be like a super small incremental change, as opposed to if you only get feedback once a year, then it's like this huge pile of stuff that you have to change, and that then generates anxiety, and you can push it off if you maybe don't know how to break it down, or just generally adds the work of having to break it down. Whereas if the feedback loops are embedded in your processes, like if you have, for example, your hiring process, at the end when it's just the interviewers and they review the candidates, on your template you've got like the method that you're using to review the candidates, and then you would have like a couple of, again, templated, very specific questions. Did we gather the data we needed? Did we keep track of time? Did it flow well? Did it, like, just a bunch of questions that are gonna help people share that feedback in a normalized way, in a like utilitarian way, rather than seeing feedback as like this scary thing. And to help with that, I think it's a bit like not going to the dentist. It's a bit like your tooth hygiene. So you brush your teeth every day, but you still want to go to the dentist once a year. And so you have like your feedback in process, your pulse surveys, whether it's through Lattice or Office Vibe or whatever sort of anonymized, like how's it going around X, Y, and Z topics. And then like you have your deeper feedback bits that are more like going to the dentist, like 360 process biannually. Or to go back on the product mindset, you can do user interviews, but with your people. If you have a product mindset and therefore your users are your employees, then there's so much you can learn from just product methodologies, whether it's jobs to be done and understanding the anxieties and inertias and motivations from your people, or if it's user experience interviews, just like the methodology to ask questions around those, like what the purpose is. And so, yeah, those would be the dentist side of things.
Brilliant, thanks guys. We had one question came to me directly there. Will, was there any reason why you chose Lattice over Culture Ramp or any of the other options?
Oh, you should probably be asking our people ops manager is actually here watching, Mike. He's the one who was who's overseeing the entire project, so I'd hate to speak for him, but I mean, my understanding it was the features available best suited our needs, and the cost was in line with our expectations. But sorry to butcher all the work you've done over the past about 6 weeks, Mike, into one sentence.
Okay, fair enough. All right, well, Mike, feel free to add to that if you want, or drop something down in the chat as well. We had another question come in from Carly on the chat here. So would you say other elements fall into people ops also, like office, health and safety, culture, org design, well-being, etc. And then HR is the employment law compliance side of things.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I still question the whole HR people ops thing, but like you know, at my tutor, we have a head of people, we have a people team, and that incorporates everything from talent all the way through to, you know, exit and everything in between. So all the compliance pieces, they just sit in people for us. And I'm sure another company they might decide to call it head of HR, and maybe they'll do some of the stuff we consider people. But yeah, I think it really I don't know. I guess I don't know. I just think it really depends. But absolutely, you get people ops can definitely be office, and so can someone in the HR team. It's very broad. I think it's very company to company. Maybe Marie's got more to say.
No, I think I agree. I think it links back to how you want to structure your team as well. You like, depending on your size and your needs, you could have like an organization development specialist or an internal people partner who just does coaching with managers. Or you could have, like, if you're a standalone person, like I was at Learnably, then you do talent, reputation, hiring, onboarding, you know, well-being, offboarding, the whole shebang. But if you're a bigger team, you could have someone whose job is solely to focus on embedding, you know, equity, inclusion, and diversity across the entire company.
I think, yeah, like Marie says, depending, you know, if you're a small company, you've got one person doing it. As you grow, you'll probably fill the team with the skill gaps and need filling the most. So if, you know, if for some reason you work in quite a complex industry like fintech, I know there's quite a lot of rules around like employment. Maybe you would need to go ahead and run the compliance, or maybe you'll have a completely separate team that manages that, I guess, like Marie says. So I guess as you start to build out your own team, if you're a leader, you'll identify the gaps and you'll plug them with the right people.
Yeah, and even if you're a standalone and you don't have an HR background, you're going to want to have a lawyer available for a call. Like, don't, this is a must-have, right?
Yeah, we went quite long without a lawyer, but we've got one now. I like to think of myself as an honorary lawyer.
Can I ask? Sorry, Evie.
Go ahead, Barry.
Can I just double check? You both mentioned this, and it was one thing that was on my mind already. But if you could build this team of your own, right? This team of specialists. I love this idea, like a kind of a government cabinet where you had a specialist in every kind of area. How many specialists would you have? If it was like money wasn't a problem, you just wanted this, you wanted to make sure that everything was covered. In your experience, from what you've seen so far, what specialists would you two build in your master team?
So I think firstly, I guess the size of the, like, I guess you would only need as many people depending on the size of the team you've got. You wouldn't want to have all these specialists like floating around with very narrow remits, but not enough to focus on. So it really does depend, as we all know, like the size of the people team will be dictated by the team. I've often heard like between 5 and 8% floating around, often on the higher end for like quickly scaling companies. But even at my tutor, we prefer to sit on the smaller end because we've opted, as lots of other people probably have, to have a lot of control within the management structures. We believe that that's where the strongest relationship lies. So we like to be quite a hands-off people function. We don't want to just sort of, anytime there's a dispute, you plop the HR specialist, the people specialist in. So we try and be quite light touch. So that means we're always going to try and stay on the little end, the smaller end where we can. But as you grow, you will need to think about not only specialists, but partnering across the business. Like, how are you making sure that you've done this process, that it is being implemented, that there is that level of support? So the way we're thinking about it as we scale is almost like a matrix. So it's sort of like, you've got the amount of time that someone has to focus on. Say you want it to be maybe 40% partnering. Okay, so how many people can they effectively partner? Say you want to put them against a team of between 35 and 50, and that's going to take up 40% of the time. Then that means you've got room for someone who's got a specialism there. So the way we're thinking about doing it, which is going to be different for everyone else because you'll have different teams, but we're looking at adding in L&D as a specialism. We're looking at adding in diversity and inclusion, and that's particularly tied to, as we potentially go international, we'll be dealing with multiple cultures. And then the other one is like a marketing, because we've got ownership over employer brand, like an internal comms. So they're the areas that we're looking to bolster out. And then I guess within those specialists, where the work lies, you might have, people reporting into that, depending on where the workload is. So that's how we're thinking about it. But that isn't to say that's right for everyone.
I think that it also depends on, for Will, it's a real life example. So what my tutor is aiming to achieve and like why and how that fits into it. In terms of like what I would do with unlimited resources and unlimited like talent and stuff like that, I don't know, depends on the project that I'd be working on, I think. Sorry, it's not a very helpful answer.
No, because I think there's another piece as well around with people. What I've found is you can only do so much anyway. Even if you have the biggest team in the world, if you need all the managers to learn a brand new system and they need to go so much training, you can only do so much training. They can only take in so much information. So, and obviously there's the reactive side, but you can only launch so many new projects and so much innovation in a quarter anyway. So I think also all the resources in the world, you still don't necessarily need the biggest people to get done a reasonable amount.
And Will, you mentioned before, just touching on leadership, about the importance with feedback of leadership showing vulnerability. And I wanted to ask how, again, if there were any, how does anyone show vulnerability? But if there are any practical examples within a business space that, just how leadership shows vulnerability.
So I think something we do at my tutor is that in our all hands every month, we'll always have like a spotlight area, which is basically us holding our hands up and saying, this is something that we've not done well enough, and this is what we're going to do about it. So that's a good place to start. And then, I guess through your hiring process, just make sure it forms part of that. I know culture fit's a kind of a word that people have sort of stepped away from, cross-team fit, whatever you want to call it. Like, how receptive are people to being reflective? How receptive are they to understanding views different to their own? These are kind of questions you can feed through to make sure that the people who join are ready to be vulnerable, are ready to show that. And then, I think just like both me and Marie said, like having regular feedback loops, making it part of the culture, having a safe space. You might need to start off anonymously on some points, but ideally you can get to a point where any feedback, a majority of feedback given, can be given directly.
I think that practicing vulnerability in how that like benefit, that how that's a great thing to practice as a leader is something that my ex-CEO from Learnably, Raj, does really well. And what he would do is two things. One is share his 360 feedback publicly, and then share what he's going to do about both the constructive and positive reinforcement. Because if everyone does the reflective work with their manager, because that's who they're accountable to and partnering with, then him as the CEO is accountable to everyone, because we're all talented people who deliberately dedicate our time and skills to like our joint project, but that he's spearheading. So that's something I would recommend. And another thing is just generally like authenticity, just sharing about the context within which you're doing your work. Authenticity does not mean oversharing, like that's just something I do. But it could be, another example is from the CEO. I mean, like, you can't blame me for it. I was there for 3 years and it's my first and only people ops job until MoonPay. And he had to have back surgery last summer, and he shared about it. Yeah, he was very open about it, shared his context with the team, said why he was going to be on leave, how long he was going to be on leave for. Then he did a quick presentation on like how his growth mindset helped him overcome. He did a LinkedIn post about it. You know, that sort of also fosters trust and shows it's showing vulnerability just to be authentic.
And that's so interesting as well, because I can't imagine but that take on it, and of a C executive actually giving that information away about themselves, that's something that in any of the traditional models of HR, that's something that HR would really promote. Like, it just doesn't quite seem to. So maybe that's also another definition of where, as you said, it's people ops is about the value. Yeah.
One thing we've had, in fact, on a few people have asked a similar kind of question, is around looking forward. So I'd like to understand how people ops is evolving and what people leads are currently doing to change or innovate, and what does the future look like for people operations over the next few years, and what new innovations do you predict or want to see in this space? So have each of you, Will, I'll ask you first. Have you got any thoughts on how you see things evolving over the coming year or a few years?
Sure. So I guess the big one is in the people space is like this return to the office or full remote, hybrid, whatever that's looking like. It's going to be so hard to predict like how people will feel in 2 months' time, let alone how things will go in a year. But I think what's going to be really important is that that people function is like understanding of like what the markets are saying, what people are saying, what people want, what the company want, because you're going to have to kind of keep up on that, because if you get left behind and you're too far one way and you say we're staying fully remote and all the latest bunch of people flood to London for jobs and they don't choose your company because they want the social life, or maybe you're we work 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, and you miss out on loads of people who maybe have responsibilities that mean they can't work that. So I think how people approach that is going to be important, and keeping the finger on the pulse there. I think there's always more to be done with like equality, diversity, and inclusion, not only from a recruitment perspective, but like particularly as tools get better. Like even since I've been in the people space, like the tooling available, the resources available to like improve processes has gone up. So like staying on top of all of that, but also within that, within your culture, how you can be, respectful and accommodating to the different people that you're bringing in, I think is going to be really important. And I think particularly, not necessarily particularly, but something that's been very relevant recently has been kind of like psychological safety, the well-being. I think the way people think about well-being at work now compared to even when I started work however many years ago is like massive difference. Like it's almost like a pillar. It's like a pillar of people now that people think about and have to be trained in, and we put money into. We have a separate budget line just for well-being, which just was totally different. So there are areas that definitely I think companies are going to have to make sure they're staying on top of, like how things change.
Well,
I think you've said it all.
okay, cool. Yeah, this return to work, hybrid, remote first, it's a tricky thing to stay on top of, isn't it? I mean, how can you stay on top of it for what everyone wants, especially if you're in a larger organization? Are you seeing any examples of this being handled well, or any examples of it being handled badly in your space at all?
In terms of hybrid?
Yeah, well, in terms of how to handle the progression, you know, now the world is opening up again, how to kind of walk into this unknown, you know, how to do it. Are you seeing just good examples of people handling it well, and you know, leadership handling it badly, for example?
I mean, examples of handling it well, I think, is anything that's based on principles of asking your people, doing what they want, what they need, whilst keeping it viable, and adding value for like both people and the business. I wish I could say that there's a trend that's going upwards on this, but also COVID is bringing a recession, and that means that companies in a lot of cases will have the upper hand on talent. And so, yeah, like that's unfortunately all I've got to say about this.
Yeah, I think I saw one article, probably in People Stories, shared, and I think it was Spotify who did a piece around kind of what their employees can expect. I guess you want to take the feedback from your employees, but it's not, you know, it's not whatever says goes. You can't accommodate everyone. And I think what's really important for a company is that you've got a very clear strategy. Like what's your philosophy? Like, how do you want to operate? And making sure that whatever decision you make, you're, I guess, staying true to that. So, you know, my tutor, we're really keen to make sure that we can be as flexible as possible to make sure that as many people can work at my tutor. So that might put us on, you know, the sliding scale more towards like hybrid, a hybrid model, like flexible working hours, like shorter work weeks, all that stuff that can kind of tie into office. But other companies, you know, might not have that, and that, as long as they've got their philosophy as why, and they understand like what that will mean, and they can stand behind that, that's, you know, that's up to them. But it's really just important that you have those principles, whatever principles you want to follow, that's how you make your decision.
I agree. I think the more you're deliberate and vocal about your leading principles, the more you're gonna attract the people that you want and know are like best for your company. And it may not be the same as like your neighbors. Like other companies have different principles, and you need to adapt to what it is that you're trying to build. But yeah, being deliberate and vocal definitely will like attract the kind of talent that you want to attract.
Okay, Marie, I wanted to again pick up on something you both said there. Psychological safety is something that yeah, I guess all of us learned about, like, well, I certainly learned about last year, and was a relatively new thing until last year. But it really helped me then grasp this whole people as users and that kind of thing, and making sure everybody had that kind of fairness. But I think, Maria, it was a chat we had maybe kind of a year where you were saying about how at Learnably you guys would work so hard to try and balance the playing field, and make sure that when people were applying, they felt that psychological safety through the whole application process, and you know, all the way through. I think it was just a great example of people ops in a recruitment, you know, employee experience. Could you speak around that at all? Like maybe just go into a bit more detail in either where that came from, or how you managed to level the playing fields?
Sure. I think to make people feel safe, even when like clearly the dynamic is imbalanced because they're applying and like you've got one position available. It's just to make everyone feel valued as a person, as an individual. And so it's very like simple things like they still use it, an applicant tracking system that allows you to automate stuff. And thanks to automation, you can have like high tech, high touch. And so bulk email your applicants and be like, thank you so much. By the way, I'm a team of one and I haven't gone around to like reading all of the applications, but that doesn't have anything to do with the quality of your stuff. Just like little things like that, that you kind of, I don't know about you, but I wish I had it when I applied to a lot of different places. That is what is going to make people feel safe, because psychological safety is inherent. It's just you as a person. And trust is you in interaction with a person or an entity or like whatever it may be. But they have the same properties. And so the more you build trust as like you're a company and you treat people well, you add value to their lives and you just treat them like they're real people who just want an update. And the more you're going to build that trust, the more trust you have, the safer they're going to feel, because they're going to also be able to like share their feedback or know that they're valued.
Fantastic.
And then on another piece around that kind of psychological safety, something that we found is really important, I guess at the start of lockdown, the people team were kind of saying all these great things about what staff can do and how they can take time and how they can structure the workday. But what we found in reality when we spoke to people is they didn't feel comfortable doing it. And when you dig in, when you see the senior leaders not embodying these behaviors necessarily, not through any particular fault, they're just busy, they feel they don't need it. Even though you're saying one thing, if people are behaving a different way, people don't feel they've got that safety to do it. Like if the senior people behave in a certain way, surely mirroring, I should do the same if I want to get there. So it's really just making sure that not only what you're saying is also shown in actions and at the right levels. I think something that's important.
Yeah, I agree. I also want to add one last bit about psychological safety. It's not just a people operations thing. HR is like not left out of that equation, but I think that in terms of how prioritized it is and how strategically it is thought about, and please tell me if I'm wrong in the chat, like, because I've never worked in HR, but my understanding is in HR, psychological safety would be a thing of, does the person in charge care about this? Whereas, so not necessarily systemically institutionalized as an area of focus that's like, I don't know, something that you would track as a performance metric, for example. Whereas in people ops, because the conversations are like from a slightly different perspective, it is something that is like systemically embedded.
I like that. Systemically embedded psychological safety. That's
Big words.
Yeah, man. Will, just coming back to what you were saying there, about the senior leaders, you're saying one thing and wanting to look all great, and then the senior leaders not embodying that. And I think Evie asked you earlier, and I think we covered it a little bit, but how do you make your senior leaders do things in a people ops role? Obviously, we're going to have people on this call in all kind of levels of seniority in people ops. And I remember speaking to somebody else at the very beginning that was struggling to convince her senior leaders of the importance of this stuff. So it's clearly a challenge there. How do you do it? How do you get your senior leaders on board and make sure that bottom up, top down is kind of all in sync?
I think whenever we're dealing with senior leaders, it depends on who your senior leaders are. You might have a group, or say it's a CEO specifically, that love metrics. So if you can go away and collect some metrics around these areas and the impact, that might be one way to speak. Some people love. There's some people that love like network. So like, what are other people doing? If you can turn around and say, hey, this is how other people are approaching it. I've seen it work well. Like, can we have a go? That's another way to convince. So I don't necessarily think there's necessarily one way, but obviously if you can whatever you're saying, if you can speak to people, collect evidence, both quantitative and qualitative, and make sure it's being shared, both to the senior leaders and I think it's fair to share to the wider company as well, like how people are feeling. That's a good place to start.
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases, there are two sides of the same coin. So if you take like well-being, for example, you can have, just even in people ops, right? The perspective of well-being is important because people are important, and without people, your business is not going to thrive. So focus on your people first. Or same coin, other side, like your business needs healthy people, and this is why strategically it's important that you focus on well-being, because your business is the most important thing. It's going to be the same process, it's different motivations. It could be like why are company values important? I mean, you can apply it to anything, to like, why is learning and development important? Because people want to be fulfilled. That's going to make them feel engaged and stimulated. And on the flip side of that, yes, that makes for like more performing people. You want to keep your like high performers alert. You want to like, it's good for innovation and all of that. The process is the exact same. Is two sides of the coin. And actually, wherever your motivation comes from, I think like the tangible result, it doesn't change that much. I've always struggled trying to legitimize the like business impact, because my motivation is people, but then there's so much to gather around like metrics and like, you know, retention. If the happier people are, the more they're going to stick around. It's like quite
I guess another bit is if you've got a people strategy in place that the senior leaders buy into, you know, you've got your philosophy that you stand behind, and within that, you don't need to say explicit words, but the behaviors you should just be able to do things that relate to well-being. You can kind of take those actions because everything you do should feed into that philosophy. And if they're bought into that, and that's that sort of strategy, then you can act in these ways, I guess.
yeah. And also, like, as a CEO, you don't necessarily need to understand the nitty-gritty of that. All you need to do is hire someone great, trust them, and share your Legos.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks. I really like that at the beginning there, where you've got to just understand who these people are, how they think, and how to talk their language, and then put it into their terms, like you say, either metrics or networks or however that is, to get them on board. I think it's to be not followed often. I'm like thinking to myself and thinking, yeah, that's very obvious as what to do, but yet the thing that you wouldn't necessarily do. We're closing in now on 2 o'clock. I'm just going to ask a few more questions. I'm also just going to put a link in the chat here. It's just an empty Google Doc. If you want to put your LinkedIn address on there and just connect with everyone else on the call. I know, Dan, I think you've already put your LinkedIn down there. So feel free, if everyone wants to keep this conversation going offline or connect with Will and Marie, feel free to do so. So just in closing, we've obviously got some people who are juniors who've never done this, been in people leadership role before. We've got people from HR that are moving into this role, and probably people that are in talent or recruitment and one day want to progress into this role. What for you both, Marie, maybe starting with you, what would make somebody a great head of people? What is to go for? What skills can they develop?
I want to send this one to Will first, because he's a head of people.
Gosh. I mean, that's a difficult question. I guess what's probably important, and again, I've only worked at one company, but I think what's important is that if you go into a company head of people, even if you've got some very well-formed ideas, that might not necessarily work at this different company they're at. You need to be, obviously you need to understand what's going, like what are people doing? You'll obviously have some good institutional knowledge, but how you then apply that to the business you're in, that's going to be the make or break. I think that's really important. Ahead of people as well is going to need to be strategic, so like how they operate with the senior leadership team and get them bought in to the strategy you set, the philosophies that you want to work by, because then once that's signed off, you can do, I guess, whatever you want almost below, as long as it aligns to that. And the last piece is the team building. So like, you know, filling in for the skill gaps that you don't have, making sure you've got the right resource in at the right time. I think there are a few things that I think wouldn't go down too badly.
I think Will, you've given a very good answer, and I'm not trying to get out of it. Like, you've genuinely given a good answer, and also I'm conscious of time, and I'd like to like use the last minute to ask the audience, do you feel like you've got more clarity on what the difference is between HR and people ops, or you just think that like we're nice and entertaining? Or it could be both. It could be both. We can be nice, entertaining, and add value and clarity to your lives, and that would be great.
I think on top of being nice and entertaining, I've certainly, and again, falling into the category, as Barry's just said, as a complete junior who would like to learn more. I was just making some notes as you were speaking, but yeah, just so interesting this, as you said, how well-being is becoming more of a pillar. And again, talking about vulnerability in work and how psychological safety is inherent. So yeah, a resounding yes, Marie.
Good. Anyone else wants to go before they jump off to their next, whatever it is, because it's now 2 o'clock. In case you needed a call in, that's yours. It's 2 o'clock. No, well then I hand over to Barry.
Brilliant. I'm just waiting to see if any other microphones unmute. Anyone else that would share that, because I'd love to know that as well. Please kill my awkward silence. It's going to last to the end, isn't it? Dan cannot speak because of the noise around me, but made it clearer for me. Thank you for that. And Erica, no news is good news. Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for joining us and being with us. I hope you have got a lot out of this. It's certainly been really interesting, and I think it's really taken me from having so much content online about this to actually, yeah, feeling like I properly understand the difference. So thank you, Will and Marie, again, for your time on this one. Please do get involved. I've put that document up there, so if anybody wants to click on it, leave their LinkedIn or whatever, and connect with each other, please do. Otherwise, we will see you at the next one. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.